Well, today we're continuing in our study of the book of Revelation, but before we come to the text for this week, I wanted to let you know that we are developing some really exciting plans for the fall as a church. In fact, what we're planning is one of the most exciting initiatives I think I've ever been a part of, and we're going to be sharing those plans with you on the weekend of September 13th. So please make sure you're in attendance at one of our worship opportunities the weekend of September 13th, because you don't want to miss the announcement about our fall programming. Well, we are in the book of Revelation, which, as we know from our study, is a first century document included at the very end of the Bible. It's written by a man named John, who's been exiled by the Roman government to the island of Patmos, which is an island in the Aegean Sea. And it's a type of literature, the book of Revelation is a type of literature known as apocalyptic literature, which is a style of literature that we're not very familiar with today, but it's a type of literature that was fairly well known in the ancient world. Now, apocalyptic literature was known for using symbolism, imagery, and artistry to help listeners and readers think about life differently. The book of Revelation, it's written to jar its listeners and readers out of their complacency, to prompt them to see life from a bigger and broader perspective than just their limited linear viewpoint. And contrary to the way the book is popularly viewed, the book of Revelation really doesn't talk so much about the future as it does about the present. We've seen the author of the book is constantly making veiled references and comparisons with life in the Roman Empire in the first century. This is the context from which the message of the book of Revelation must be understood. And as we've seen, there's a fair amount of comparison between life in the first century Roman Empire and life in our culture today. While there are a lot of differences, to be sure, there are a lot of similarities, and that makes the message of the book of Revelation very relevant for us today. Now, last weekend, we began in chapter 6 of the book, which, if you'll remember, is part of the second cycle of visions in the book. And the second cycle of visions, it begins in chapter 4 with the author describing heaven, the dwelling place of God. And remember, in this vision of heaven, God is on a throne in the center of all creation. And as we saw 2 weeks ago, this God has a scroll in his hand. Now, the idea behind the scroll that God holds is that the scroll contains God's plan for the world. This scroll, in essence, contains the secret of life. God has in his hand the key to understanding all of life and human history, which is why the author weeps when he realizes that no one can open or read this scroll. Here before him in his vision is the secret to life from God himself, but no one can look inside. That all changes when the slain lamb steps forward. As we said last weekend, this is a clear image of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is worthy to open this scroll containing a revelation of what is to come, containing in essence the mystery of life. And he is empowered to make that mystery known to all people. But before he does that, he has to open the seals that are sealing the scroll. So in a few chapters, we're going to get to the contents of the scroll, the actual mystery of life, the secret of life. But before we get to the scroll's contents, we have these strange visions that the author sees as each of the seals are opened. And remember from last week, these 7 seals, very common on important documents in the ancient world, they would have been strings tied around the scroll, sealed with wax or clay, and with the imprint of the author's stamp or ring. So in chapter 6, the Lamb, Jesus Christ, begins to break open the seals and cut the strings. And last week we saw that as the first 4 seals are opened, the author has a vision of 4 horses and riders, each signifying devastation and destruction. These 4 horses serve as a warning that there are forces in life that the Roman Empire cannot control. But the God who is seated on the throne in the center of the universe does have control over. The first 4 seals challenge the listener or reader to think about where or in whom are they going to put their confidence and trust. This is an important challenge or question for our culture as well. Where are we putting our trust? In whom or what are we putting our confidence? If someone were to observe our lives for a week, how would they answer that question? This is what the first 4 seals and the 4 horses prompt us to think about. Now, there are 3 seals left to be opened. So let's listen again this week as the Lamb opens seals 5 and 6.
When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying,
How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?
Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer, until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren, who would be killed as they were, was completed. I looked when he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood, and the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks,
Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?
Now, as the 5th seal is open, what does John see? He sees the souls of the martyrs in heaven. Now, it's the end of the 1st century. Persecution in the Roman Empire has not been widespread, but it has been real. Every Christian in the Roman Empire has not been persecuted or arrested or executed. In fact, we know that some Christians are living very comfortably in the Roman Empire. But some Christians have been persecuted, particularly in the city of Rome during Emperor Nero's reign. Persecution at that time was widespread and extreme, and many Christians lost their lives. It's perhaps the souls of some of these martyrs that the author is now seeing. And where are they? The text says they're under the altar. This is a reference from ancient Judaism, signifying that their deaths have honored God, just like an ancient sacrifice would have. And what do they receive? They receive a white robe, a symbol in the ancient world of victory or of honor. These individuals are being honored. And what are they doing? They're resting. Rest, an image especially from the ancient world that signifies contentment, happiness, even bliss. The work week is completed and it's sleeping in on Saturday morning. The martyrs have been accepted by God. They're honored by creation and they're enjoying a blissful rest. All the while people in the Roman Empire are thinking, you poor, tragic fool. You sacrificed your life all because you would not say, Caesar is Lord. You forfeited your life on this earth. You gave up everything, all because you were involved in this strange new religion that claimed allegiance to a Jewish prophet that the Roman authorities crucified. You fool. That's how the martyrs would have been viewed by the average person in the Roman Empire. Because you see, for the average person, then and now, this life is all there is. This is it. So if you don't have it here or now, guess what? You're never going to have it. So it makes sense to live in this life largely from the perspective of doing everything you can to make this life safe, comfortable, and enjoyable. And if that doesn't happen for you, well, it's tragic because this is all there is. The author of the book of Revelation says through this vision, listen, that's not the whole picture. This life is a big part of what is. This life is very important and a significant part of reality. So working to make this life pleasant and enjoyable is a worthy goal, but not at the cost or compromise of ultimate truth or ultimate reality. John says to his first century listeners and readers, there is something more to life than just the here and now. There is more to this life than what we presently see. He in essence says, we saw the martyrs die. That was the end of life as we understood it. But guess what? They're not dead. They're in another dimension of reality where they are enjoying honor and peace and bliss, the very things they were denied on this earth. What we see is not all there is. That's what John is saying in his vision of the martyrs and the fifth seal. There is more to life than what we see. Boy, how we need to hear that truth. Because if you and I make decisions simply based on what we see in this life, we'll either be disappointed or misguided, or as is often the case, both. There is a reality beyond what we see, experience, and observe. Are we in touch with that reality? Now, the sixth seal continues with this same theme. John now sees images of divine judgment. Now, these images in the sixth seal might not make a lot of sense to us, but they would have had great meaning to people in the first century, especially those from a Jewish background. These are images associated with God's final judgment of the world. And here's the point the images make. It is ultimately God, the God who is seated on the throne at the center of creation, the God John saw in chapter 4, the God revealed by the slain Lamb. It is ultimately this God with whom one must deal and contend. The images of judgment are symbolic. Like the description of heaven in chapter 4, the author doesn't intend these images to be a detailed or technical description of the end of the world. instead, he borrows images common in ancient Judaism to make the point that one day, all that will be left is the reality of God. One day, we will have to deal with, connect to, reference our life from this God who is in the center of all creation. God is the one universal in all of life, all of reality, with whom we must deal and contend. In John's vision of the future, its vision of future judgment, all people of the highest status and lowest position, all people have to confront and deal with this God who is on the throne. There is more to life than what we see. This, John says, is reality. The application to the author's first century listeners and readers and the application to us, it's essentially the same. John is urging us to spend as much, if not more, effort developing our relationship with God and our awareness of the reality of God as we spend developing our life in this world that we can see and experience. That's such an important statement. Let me say it again. John's urging his readers, he's urging us to spend as much, if not more, intention and effort developing our relationship with God and our awareness of the reality God inhabits as we spend developing our life in this world that we can see and experience. There is more to life than what we see. How would you assess your life by that measure? Or maybe more importantly, how would someone close to you assess your life by that standard? You know, would they say, Brian is really living for the here and now. He's put all his eggs in the basket of this life and this world. Or would they say, he lives with an awareness of something more than this present life, something greater than what is seen, and he's working to grow his awareness of God and the reality that God inhabits? What would someone say about my life? What would someone say about your life? And here's why that question is important. Not because it matters what someone else thinks about my life or your life, but because if there really is something beyond this life, if there is a God whose reality transcends my present experience, it is to the degree that I am aware of and in touch with that God, it is to that degree that I am fully alive. Again, there's a lot there, so let me say that all again. If there really is something beyond this life, if there is a God whose reality transcends my present experience, then to the degree that I am aware of and am in touch with that God, it is to that degree that I am fully alive. And I want to be fully alive. I want to see and experience and enjoy life for all it is. And I can only do that as I realize and acknowledge that there is more to life than what I see. My hope for each of us is that as we live our lives this week, we'll be prompted by the things we see and experience to remember that there is more to life than the here and now, more to life than what we can manipulate and control. There is more to life than what we see.